Welcome back to the Fantasy Baseball Cafe podcast. We're now official, folks. It has a name. This is now the MLB Rundown podcast, and I'm joined by CBSSports.com's RJ White. How's it going, RJ?
It's going good. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. Glad it's Friday. Really looking forward to opening night, Sunday night. I can't think of a better way to wrap up Easter Sunday than watching some baseball, some Cards and Cubs. And then, of course, Monday. Monday's like a holiday for me. I love opening day. What about you?
I love it. I took the day off. I get to go see the Braves play the Marlins down in Miami. It'll be my first time watching the Braves live in a long time, so I'm excited.
That's excellent. That's the way to really enjoy opening day. I'll be glued to the television, but I won't be taking it in. So a bit jealous of you there. Before we jump into the podcast, the meat of the podcast, I'd like to point out that Brad Johnson finished up his fantasy team preview power rankings. They rounded out with the Washington Nationals. Little shock there. I mean that rotation's loaded, great lineup. But if you're still preparing for fantasy drafts, I actually have one Sunday during the day prior to the opening night game. Definitely get on there. Definitely check those out. Even if you've already had your drafts, it never hurts to review fantasy content to be sure that you're rostering the best players. I mean, it's amazing to me how many good players slip through the cracks. Just hop on the forums every now and again. Check out the draft trade keeper questions and should I cut so-and-so for so-and-so. It always shocks me some of the names that are available. So research doesn't stop at the draft. Definitely hop on there, check those out. Check out the rankings from both myself and RJ. And also, while you're on there, check out RJ's most recent pieces. And speaking of those pieces, the Riding the Wave articles, why don't you tell me a little bit about each? I broke it down into AL and NL to post on the site, but great content for both. So tell me a little bit about each.
Yeah, so obviously you can't really focus on spring statistics. Every year we have guys like Jake Fox who break through with like 10 home runs and start to get people excited, and that's not necessarily the thing you want to be watching in the spring. You can't really compare apples to oranges. A lot of players use spring to work on things, and a lot of teams use the spring to determine their final roles. So I went through each team and kind of saw the one fantasy relevant thing that I saw with how the roles were determined, how certain players winning jobs or losing jobs or potential injuries affected certain position battles and certain playing time factors that might help people in fantasy leagues.
And that's exactly how people should be handling the spring. I get a little concerned when I see people talking about, oh, so-and-so hit 5 home runs in the spring. Do you think they're going to have a breakout? Well, as you said, if that hitter hit 2 of their home runs off of Jake Peavy working on a straight changeup, well, I'm not terribly impressed by that because Jake Peavy may opt to scrap that straight changeup that he's not thrown in over a decade in the majors. So it really is important to understand the context of the spring and what you should be looking for. And I would say that both of your Riding the Wave articles definitely captured that. Speaking of the spring, though, and maybe a little bit on the number side, who impressed you this spring? Whose stock has increased in your eyes? And I guess after that, why don't you tell me a little bit about whose stock is down for you as well?
Well, the guy that I think increased the most is Taijuan Walker. At one point, he was considered maybe the best pitching prospect in all of baseball. He looked fantastic this spring, and obviously you can't trust all the spring numbers and think that he's going to do exactly that during the season. But it has to be noted he didn't give up a run until his final spring start. Ended the practice run with a .36 ERA, 24-4 strikeout to walk ratio. I don't think that's necessarily a complete mirage. He's probably not going to go toe-to-toe with Clayton Kershaw all year, but I think if he stays healthy in 2015, and that was his main problem last year, staying healthy, I think he could finish as a top 20 pitcher this year.
I don't think that's outrageous. I will actually piggyback on your top prospect mention and say that he was considered arguably the top pitching prospect at the time that Jose Fernandez was also in the minors. So we're talking about real deal, big time, blue chip prospect pedigree right here. And one thing I really liked reading was, in addition to the great numbers, I like reading the change to his repertoire. He typically threw a cutter last year. He implemented a slider this spring, and from what I've read, the slider looks really good. It looks like a better pitch than the cutter, so I'm with you. I think the upside is definitely there for him to be a top 20 pitcher, and the fact is, you don't have to draft him as a top 20 pitcher. I moved him up significantly in my Fantasy Pros ranks the other day. Believe he cracks the top 50 for me now. If not, he's right on the fringe. So I'm with you. I really think that the breakout potential is great with him, and it never hurts pitching in a Safeco field either. So definitely in on Walker. Who's the guy that you're down on after the spring?
I think skills-wise, Masahiro Tanaka should be a very high target, and if he came in and convinced me he was healthy, I wouldn't have any problem with him in the top 20 pitchers, but that hasn't happened. His velocity's been down a little this spring, though that's not uncommon for pitchers as they prepare for the regular season because a lot of people don't go full velocity right away. More importantly, his fastball hasn't had much life. One scout called it flat and hittable after his last start. The biggest concern is his health. He suffered a partially torn UCL last season but didn't undergo Tommy John surgery. So his elbow may be a ticking time bomb, and it's probably not worth relying on him to finish the year healthy. So in head-to-head leagues particularly where a postseason is looming for people, I can't see the sense in rostering him over a safer pitcher in that same tier of players.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you're getting such a huge discount on Tanaka that you can just roll the dice. I agree. Usually, I wouldn't be concerned with diminished velocity from a starter this early in the season, prior to the season in the spring. But when that pitcher is also dealing with a partially torn UCL that they opted to rehab instead of undergoing surgery on, it does become a concern. And I know somebody that agrees with both of us having concerns about Tanaka staying healthy, and that's Pedro Martinez, the MLB analyst and former super stud pitcher. Basically questioned whether Tanaka was throwing all of his pitches with full force, and basically outright said that he doesn't believe he's going to make it through the season. So, I mean, granted, I don't take everything the media says significantly, but when Pedro talks, he doesn't have a filter, and I tend to like that. I buy into a guy like that a little bit more than your typical talking head media who just kind of go through the motions and say the same things. And any concerns hearing that from Pedro at all?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Pedro's point of view in this situation because Pedro isn't a guy that was like a fringe player when he played, that he kind of needs the attention to say something that is buzz provoking and get people to talk about his name. He's Pedro Martinez. I mean, everybody knows his name.
Yeah. They
highly respect him. They highly respect his ability. And with that no filter kind of thing you were talking about, he's going to speak his mind, and he's not going to try to make waves with what he says. He's just going to say what he believes is the truth. And if you're going to listen to one person about pitching, I mean, Pedro Martinez is a good person to listen to.
I agree. I mean, that's another really good point. I mean, we're not talking about a guy who was just an okay pitcher. We're talking about basically one of the best in the business ever. So when he talks, I tend to listen, especially when it's on the subject matter of pitching. One guy that I know we're both in agreement on being down on this year, just by our emails, is Yasmani Tomas. As recently as a few hours ago today, there's still talk that he could open the year in the minors, he could open the year on the bench in the big leagues if there's enough playing time for him to get in some outfield and some third base. But the glove's getting really bad reviews at third base, bad reviews on the body, and I'm just terrified by the Diane Viciato comps. I mean, it's still early. He's still got time to obviously right the ship and really provide fantasy gamers with what they are drafting him for and what they wanted him for in the first place, and that's power. But I'm staying away at this point. I can't see myself owning Yasmani Tomas. Are you in agreement?
Yeah, considering the size of the deal he signed this offseason, I think it was 6 years, $68.5 million. I think a lot of people were already anointing him as the next Puig and Abreu as far as success stories coming into the league. And it would have been easiest for the D-backs if he'd been able to handle third base, to stick him at third and kind of go with their ideal lineup. But it just doesn't look like it's going to work. I still think that they're committed to trying him at third base. And since he's not ready for that at the major league level, I do think that he opens the season in the minors so he could continue to get work at third base. It's not he's done it in Cuba, like it's not necessarily completely foreign to him, but it wasn't his preferred position. He's used to playing corner outfield, and to stick him at third base is going to be a transition, regardless, his level of preparation coming into the season. So I really do think that they're going to have him in the minors, have him work extensively at third to see if they can make that work long term.
And I think that makes sense. And you get him some plate appearances in a low-stress atmosphere, especially at the AAA Pacific Coast League. I think that's a real chance for him to build some confidence and kind of springboard that into a more productive start to his big league career than just throwing him out there when he's not really ready at the big league level. Because I'm a positive person, I'd like to talk about a few more positive players players that we have positive reviews for before getting to my favorite part of the podcast, and that's answering some form questions. One guy who was demoted to AAA already is Danny Salazar. I still like him long term. It looks like Zach McAllister is probably going to round out that Cleveland rotation, but he was brilliant in the bullpen and really needed his stuff to play up. His fastball played up, slider played up in the bullpen. Didn't have to go to his full repertoire of pitches, and I think long term for an Indians team that projects to contend for the American League Central and possibly reach the World Series, I do think Salazar is eventually going to be the guy that slots number 5 in that rotation. I think Zach McAllister gives him a great bullpen arm. I know Brad Johnson, our colleague at Fantasy Baseball Cafe, is very high on him. He wrote elsewhere, I believe at Fangraphs, that he views him in a similar light to Wade Davis. Obviously, to put that kind of a lofty comp on him is a little bit maybe over the top to expect that, but the fact that the stuff plays up, the fact that we've seen starting pitchers do this before, I definitely think it's reasonable to consider McAllister as a long-term option in that bullpen as just that relief ace of sorts before you get to Cody Allen in the 9th. But anyways, back to Salazar. I view this as a buying period on him. If you've got room on your benches and you can stash him, I look at what he did in the second half last year, and I see a guy that's got big strikeout stuff. I don't hear any concerns about the stuff itself, just the lack of consistency in the spring. And I think get him off to a good start in the International League, and we could see him maybe as early as May. And at that point, I still wouldn't rule out 175 strikeouts from Salazar. I mean, this is a guy that can strike out better than a batter an inning.
Yeah, I expected better of him coming into the spring. And again, you can't take everything that happens in spring as indicative of what's going to happen during the season. I'm surprised he didn't end up on any of my fantasy teams because I was pretty high on him coming into the spring, a lot higher than a lot of rankings I saw out there. I don't expect him to give up 5 homers for every 11 innings he pitches, which is what he did this spring. That's really going to end up turning into a small sample size kind of mirage. And considering his upside, I do think he's well worth a bench spot in standard mixed leagues, provided that those teams can get away with having a guy that's not doing anything on their bench based upon how healthy the rest of the teams are. But if you can stash him on the bench, obviously I would go that route if possible.
Definitely. Speaking of a guy who played some minor league baseball last year, this guy's going to get a chance at the big league level due to injuries. Tell me a little bit about why you like Michael Taylor, what you see in him, and what your outlook is for him this year.
Yeah, I think he's been a little overlooked considering how good of a prospect he is. Maybe it's just because another touted outfield prospect named Michael Taylor debuted for the A's in 2011 and hasn't really done anything in the majors to this point. But the younger Nationals-ier version of Michael Taylor hit 304, 390, 526 with 23 home runs and 37 stolen bases in less than 500 plate appearances at the top 2 levels of the minors last season, and he was only at the age of 23. He's been even better this spring, hitting 322 with 4 home runs. He'll need to conquer his strikeouts, and until he does, I think he's more likely to hit 250 than 300 at the major league level. But if he can get off to a hot start and capture a 300 batting average early, he could force a very difficult decision for the Nationals when Denard Span returns, because a guy that young, if he's producing, I don't see how you take him out of the lineup.
Well, and also in Taylor's defense of getting playing time, you also have to remember that Bryce Harper's missed time throughout his career. Jason Worth isn't exactly a model of good health. So even when Span comes back, there's a distinct possibility that an injury opens up playing time elsewhere in that outfield anyway. So I like the Taylor tout. I love the power speed combination. I'm with you. The strikeout issues have me thinking that the batting average is like 250, maybe even lower at this point. But if he's hitting home runs and he's stealing bases at the rate that I think he's capable of, at the cost that you would have to acquire him, which is essentially nothing in a lot of leagues. I think he's definitely a very good dice roll early in the season, and cross the bridge of what happens when everybody's healthy, because that's rarely been the case for that Nationals outfield, and Taylor looks like the primary beneficiary this year when somebody's injured.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. I would agree. Even standard leagues, I think, use a bench spot on him, especially in 5 outfielder leagues. I mean, stick him in that fifth outfield role for now, and then make that change when you need to.
Definitely. Uh, I'll close with another player that I love, another outfielder. I talked about him on the last podcast. He had a home run again yesterday, his second of the spring. I'm still in on Travis Snyder. Last year he ranked ninth in home run and fly ball average distance per baseball heat maps. One thing I did want to check in on before we chatted today was what Travis Snyder's strikeout rate looked like, and he's striking out in less than 20% of his plate appearances in the spring. Again, not a huge spring training stats guy. I usually don't like to look at them, but I would be alarmed if I saw him striking out in a quarter or more of his plate appearances. That hasn't been the case, so I'm buying into his second half last year. Really like him in Baltimore. Are you still on board with me with Travis Snyder?
Yeah, I think he's been solid this spring. He's getting a big home park upgrade this season. The only concern for me really is playing time. The Orioles obviously have Adam Jones locked in, but aside from that, you got Pierce, Snyder, Deaza, Reimold, and Delman Young could all be fighting for at-bats at the top three positions, at the three positions of left field, right field, and designated hitter. And I know the Orioles like all those guys, so I don't think that they want any of them to sit on the bench, for days upon days at a time. I think they're going to mix and match a lot. I'd say Pierce is probably going to play most days, so if the team wants to keep everyone else involved, Snyder may even sit against some right-handers here and there just to get the other guys some at-bats. If it turns out he's an established everyday player over the first few weeks, I call him a great sleeper for the rest of the season. I'm just a little bit concerned about playing time because I really don't know how Baltimore is going to handle that situation at this point.
Completely understandable, and I guess I don't know if I would say that this works in Travis Snyder's favor, but both he and Deaza are left-handed batters. Deaza actually struggles a little bit more with left-handed pitching, I believe, than Snyder does. Snyder also looked good in a limited sample size, albeit last year. But Delman Young, I would guess the bulk of his playing time this year is going to come against left-handed pitching. The biggest problem is Diaz is the better defender, or at least the more athletic defender than Snyder. I don't know what the defensive metrics say exactly, but one would think a guy with the nickname Lunch Pal that is really on rosters for his bat, not his glove, could occasionally take that seat, especially against left-handed pitching. But as you noted, they do seem to like Delman Young, certainly more than I like him, but it is something worth monitoring. I do have to close the open by giving you a hat tip on your Andrew Miller ranking and your lower Dellin Betances ranking. It looks like we still don't have a closer named in New York, and more alarming to me is Dellin Betances' velocity being down thus far. And with Adam Warren being named the fifth starter, that removes one right-handed pitcher from that bullpen. It looks like everything is kind of lining up for Andrew Miller to get some early season saves, and if he pitches lights out at the beginning of the year, I don't know as though Joe Girardi's going to have any incentive to maybe go back to Betances.
Yeah, well, Joe Girardi seemed Friday like he was leaning actually maybe start having them share the role, which sucks for fantasy owners who invested highly in Betances, but it makes sense from a baseball perspective. I mean, why wouldn't you want to have the best possible matchups available to you late in games? Have one guy pitch the eighth one day and the other guy pitch the ninth, and then if the matchups say switch them around the next day, go ahead and do that. The ideal time to go to a timeshare closer for the Yankees is now, as you wouldn't actually have to demote anyone from closing. Both guys excelled as setup relievers last year. Neither of them are established closers. I think both are still well worth owning in all leagues, but until one of them establishes himself as the guy, the high saves total just isn't going to be there in fantasy leagues.
Yep, definitely. And that was what you preached caution in the spring, and your rankings reflected that, so definitely a hat tip to you. Moving on, let's get to the questions from the forum. Like I said, my favorite part, I love getting the forum involved. If you're not on the forum posting questions, you need to be. It's a great place to hang out and chat with fantasy baseball centric people like ourselves, and you never know, you may hear your question addressed on the podcast, on the MLB Rundown podcast. So let's start off with the first question submitted by user Oscar the Taveras. Should he trade Chris Carter and Mike Fiers for Prince Fielder and his choice of either Anibal Sanchez, Matt Shoemaker, Garrett Richards, or Chris Tillman? Adding a little bit more to this, context to this, the league is a 14-team head-to-head points league, and he owns Edwin Encarnacion and David Ortiz, with a strong rotation of Clayton Kershaw, King Felix, Tyson Ross, Doug Fister, and Dallas Keuchel. I would personally make the swap of Carter and Fiers, and that would be for fielders and Garrett Richards for me. Would you make the swap? And if so, who's your preferred starting pitcher that you'd be getting back with Fielder?
It's hard for me to do that trade, but I'm high on Chris Carter and I'm very high on Fiers, who seemed to figure things out last season after struggling the year before. When you pair his minor league numbers last season with how he performed in Milwaukee, he was a complete lockdown ace. He struck out 205 batters and walked only 34 people. That's like Chris Sale level of production. Obviously, you have to discount the fact that about 60% of that came at AAA. I'm not saying he's going to be Chris Sale this season, but I still don't think he's being given enough credit in fantasy leagues, probably because people don't want to be burned by him a second time, and they're not enamored with the pure velocity and the pure stuff that he has. He does a great job mixing pitches, though. There have been pitchers in the past that have succeeded even though they don't have the best stuff. Jared Weaver's one that's still going strong right now. I like him better than all the starters that could be included in this deal, so I'm passing on it.
Okay, interesting. I guess that's where the difference comes for us, because I agree on Carter. I do like Carter quite a bit. I like him more than Fielder, especially given his youth and the fact that this is a I believe they mentioned that it's a keeper league, but regardless, I do like Carter better, even in season-long leagues, if you're looking for power. But I guess my biggest difference is I really like Garrett Richards. I really like what he did last year. It's probably my velocity bias showing up again. So looks like we're split on this one. I'm curious to see if we're in agreement on the next question, which is submitted by Angels7777. Angels wants to know, who would you take out of this trio of pitchers? Matt Cain, Derek Holland, or Danny Salazar? It's a 5x5 head-to-head 10-team non-keeper league, and after telling me who you would take, please rank them for Angels, because for whatever reason they also want to know the rank. Maybe they're looking at possibly scooping 2 of the 3. I'm not sure.
I think it kind of depends on where you're putting them. I think if these are going to be bench pitchers and you have a pretty set rotation, I'd put Salazar at the top. I'd say if you plan on using this guy extensively early on, I'd take Derek Holland. I think Holland has slightly more upside than Kane. He might even be a safer pick despite coming back from a serious injury. So I think I go Holland, Kane, Salazar if we're looking at using these guys early on. But Salazar, Holland, Kane if we're just going to stick them on the bench for now.
You know what? We are in complete agreement here. I have Holland atop the rankings. I actually wrote about him for Fantasy Pros, and that was published yesterday, I believe. Really like the increased slider usage in terms of strikeouts. It's a non-keeper league, and it's 10 teams, so if by chance that increased slider usage ends up resulting in elbow problems, at least you can dip back into the wire. So I do like Holland. Given the league size, I think I would roll with Kane in front of Salazar if you have a limited bench, if you're going to use these guys early, like you said, because, again, the pickings on the free agent list should be fairly good in a 10-team league. But if you've got a larger bench, if this is a 10-team league with a lot of bench spots and you're just looking to stash somebody, I'm with you. Salazar ranks at the top, Holland behind him, and then Kane. So really it depends on your bench size. Consult your bench and your rankings and make a decision from there. The last question is submitted by Watermark, and it's not as simple as their headline would indicate. The headline's bets are Mookie Betts or Gregory Polanco. It's a little more complex than that, but since the league is a keep forever league, and we are dealing with Mookie Betts at his all-time peak, I would think, in terms of interest and hype, and we're maybe at the low point of Gregory Polanco's hype, you do like Mookie Betts better than Gregory Polanco, correct? Or has the hype kind of just clouded things for people to the point where maybe Gregory Polanco is being overlooked?
No, I have Betts comfortably ahead of Polanco, even considering their relative values at this point. Betts really hasn't done one thing in the last 2 years to inspire any doubt in his ability. I mean, you should have no reservations about him at this point as being a potentially elite fantasy player. The team is set to start with him in center. There was some kind of rumors that it would be him or Castillo fighting for center field because for some reason the Red Sox want to stick with Shane Victorino in right field, a guy that I personally love as a baseball player, but certainly doesn't have the upside of those two guys. With Castillo being optioned, Jackie Bradley being optioned, I mean, Betts is going to get all the playing time in center. He's going to lead off for the Red Sox. At his best, I think he could give owners Michael Brantley level production this year. And you talked about it's more complex with Jake Arrieta being on the Polanco side and Yordano Ventura being on the Mookie Betts side. I think Arrieta's good. Ventura also could emerge as a fantasy ace in a keep forever league at some point. I take the Betts Ventura side of that deal.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree that Mookie Betts is the better player, and it's not just getting sucked into the hype machine. I like Gregory Polanco, taking nothing away from him. He's a great target in keep forever leagues. He might even be a buy low option right now. But when you're comparing he and Mookie Betts, I really do think it's no competition. Mookie Betts leads off for a very good Red Sox lineup. He offers some power, he offers some speed, makes contact at a high rate, showed off great plate discipline despite his youth. I'm all in on Mookie Betts. I do like Jake Arrieta. I think he finishes the year as an SP1. I have him ranked inside the top 12 starters at Fantasy Pros. So I did have to pause when I saw he and Ventura included, but it's not like Ventura's chopped liver. I have him as a top 50 starter. I think that his swinging strike rate last year portends well for more strikeouts this year. So even though I would love to make the upgrade from Ventura to Arrieta, not at the expense of downgrading from Betts to Polanco.
I agree.
All right, that's going to wrap it up for the MLB Rundown podcast. Definitely check back in at the Fantasy Baseball Cafe this week. We got some great content going up for the first week of the season. Thank you for hopping on again, RJ, and we'll do this again next week.
All right, thanks. Have a good week.
You too. Take care.